Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Prabjot Khan, and I am Social Development Specialist from the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department of ADB, and co-moderator for this consultations today. To begin with the program, I would first invite Samantha Ho, who is Chief of Gender Equality Thematic Group, to give us welcome remarks. Over to you, Samantha.
Thank you very much, Prabjot, and good afternoon, everyone, or good morning or evening if you're in a different time zone. A very warm welcome to our first of its kind joint ADB and International Transport Forum ITF consultation on the topic of gender equality in the transport sector. It's great to see a good turnout from both organizations and from our side, from the transport sector and gender thematic groups within ADB. I think all of us on the call today appreciate that transport investments that are designed with due consideration to gender dimensions can bring significant benefits to women in terms of increased access to employment, markets, social services, as well as directly reducing their time poverty, amongst other benefits. However, we also know that too often this is not the case, and the design of transport projects and services do not always sufficiently consider women's travel needs, concerns, priorities, or preferences. And we also know that women largely remain underrepresented in transport sector agencies, particularly at decision-making level, and their voices are often not heard in transport sector policy and planning processes. For the benefit of ITF colleagues especially, ADB under its Corporate Strategy 2030 has committed to accelerate gender equality outcomes as one of 7 operational priorities. It's actually operational priority 2. And this includes ambitious targets to directly support gender equality through gender inclusive project designs in at least 75% of sovereign and non-sovereign operations by 2030, of which 55% will be gender mainstreamed. This is how we call it under our 4-tier project categorization system. We are a large player in the transport sector, as you know, and it's been really encouraging that we have seen a steady growing portfolio of gender mainstream projects in our transport sector. Last year, 2020, we had 67% of our transport sector projects categorized as gender mainstreamed. And that was a growth from 54% the year prior in 2019. So this really reflects the commitment of our transport sector colleagues in collaboration with gender specialists to really provide this kind of gender responsive infrastructure, which enables time saving and welfare enhancing infrastructure and technology for women and girls. But our portfolio is continually evolving, and there's a need to continually provide and conduct gender specific analysis that's suitable for the context to inform our future investments. And we need women and men to be equal partners in this innovative design going forward. So it's in this context that we're really happy to have this meeting today and welcome participants from across our operational departments, as well as ITF, to share this good practice so far. We also have a colleague from our economic and research department joining, as well as a member from my own team to share some of their preliminary work in this space. We're really pleased to co-host with ITF, and we understand that you are expanding your work on gender and transport, including developing of a new toolkit So we really look forward to hearing more about that and exploring potential for possible synergies and joint work going forward. I don't want to eat up further time in the agenda, but I really look forward to engaging and the interesting discussion ahead. Thank you. Back to you, Prabjot.
Thank you, Sam. Going forward, I would now invite Dr. Yari Kapila, who is the head of ITF's Secretary General's Office and the head of Quantitative Policy Analysis and Foresight Division at the ITF. Besides, working at ITF, Yari is also is an adjunct professor in transport economics at the Department of Operations and Supply Chain Management in Turku School of Economics in Finland. Over to you, Yari.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and dear colleagues, good morning and good afternoon to all of you from Paris. It is really a pleasure to be here today in this joint event with the ADB and the ITF to discuss the ways to improve gender equality in the transportation sector. Gender equality is one of the key priority topics for our Secretary General. Since his election, he has really brought the gender issue to the forefront at the ITF. Our gender workstream has been focused so far on women as transport users, women as transport workers, and more generally improving data on gender. In our research at the ITF on travel behavior, we have found that gender is a more robust determinant of mode choice than age or income, both in developed and developing cities and countries. But it is quite often the least understood variable. Other analysis, what we've done has shown that women travel shorter distances, make more non-work related trips, travel more at off-peak hours, and choose more flexible transport modes. So for more inclusive transport systems, we need to address this type of differences in travel behavior and travel preferences. This can be done by increasing the diversity of the transport workforce to better reflect these preferences, to have decision makers that understand these differences. Today, women make up only 17% of the global transportation workforce. In our view, it is therefore imperative to increase the diversity of transport workforce itself. This will require education, relevant education, training for women workers, and even more major collaborative efforts to close the data gaps we have on gender at the moment. Because without this adequate and, let's say, reliable data, it is not possible to carry out analysis to support this shift that we want to see. This lack of disaggregated gender data limits our ability to understand the differences in travel behavior by gender, and more importantly, the impact of transport policies, both on women and men. So my colleague, Wei Shuen Ying, will be talking about our new gender analysis toolkit for transport policies project, which we hope will address some of these challenges and help countries to really carry out gender analysis of their own. The gender indicators need to be identified. The current design of data collection and analysis need to be changed. It's not an easy task. This requires, therefore, the fact that if we want to narrow the gender gap, it really requires a collective effort. And we really want ITF to facilitate the discussion on gender in transport across different stakeholder groups. We are holding policy dialogue on this topic with the ministers of transport of our 63 member countries, but not just with our member countries, but also with international organizations and private sector, especially through our corporate partnership board. So today I'm really looking forward to learning more about gender and transport initiatives and toolkits that have been developed by the ADB. And I also hope that our partnership with ADB will continue to really strengthen the collaboration to advance the goals of a more sustainable, resilient, and inclusive transport future. So I wish you all a very productive meeting today, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yari, and thank you to you and Sam for setting the tone for this meeting. We really look forward to the discussions that are planned for today. Moving forward, here we'll just take a brief break to have a quick group photograph, and I will request my colleague Kawak to guide us for the photograph. Kawak, over to you.
Good day, everyone. If I could ask everyone to turn on their video cams, and yes, thank you. We have more than 60 participants, so this may take a bit of as I take a screenshot of each screen. Are still coming online. Anyway, everyone smile. 3, 2, 1, and smile. That's good for the first screen. Second screen. Again, 3, 2, 1, and smile. Thank you.
Thank you, Kawak. So now moving forward in this session, we have 2 presentations from colleagues joining from ITF. The first presentation is on the ITF's experience on gender in transport statistics. And for this presentation, we have Mario Barreto, who is a statistician at the ITF. He has been working more than 20 years in the transport statistics and leads the ITF's statistical team. Over to you, Mario, for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving the floor. I'm trying to share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see.
I'm just waiting for it to be on the presentation mode. Is it okay?
Okay.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So good afternoon and good morning to everyone. My name is Mario Barreto and I lead statistics at the ITF. So I'll talk about the current transport statistics on gender that we have, and actually I should say that we don't have. And as Yari mentioned, that's a gap that we'll have to try to fulfill. So I will have 3, sorry about that. I'll have 3 on the presentation on that outline. I'll have 3 main slides. One on the current transport statistics on gender. As I just said, it's almost none, so I'll go through what we have. How we can bridge that gap and go through some suggestions and what are the requirements. The possible role of the ITF, as Yari mentioned, we have a role to play there, and even to collect the statistics, how we can help to do that. So on the current transport statistics on gender, there are, as I say, almost no transport data collected or broken down by gender. In road injury accidents data, the gender is collected. And this is possible because the data is based on policy reports where the gender is available. What we would need is a gender breakdown for mobility variables, like vehicle drivers, passenger transport for each mode, public transport trips, the distance travel, also broken down by gender, and even if possible, the daytime of trips broken down by gender. This is just examples of the type of variables that will be useful for our analysis of the mobility. But currently, most national statistical offices do not have the network, the structure, or the resources to collect such gender information in transport activities. And the national statistical offices, even when we mention what we want, they get scared because it is almost impossible for them to provide such information. Concerning the employment statistics, the gender breakdown does exist there, and that is precious and very useful, but that belongs to business statistics and does not refer to the transport statistics. So how can we bridge the gap? Some countries have taken initiatives to try to complete the missing information. And there are good examples of possible solutions with more or less efficient results. For example, mobility surveys, they are a possible solution, and they can provide some quite interesting breakdown for gender. But they are costly, and they run generally every 5 to 10 years. And that's very long to get updates on new information. Another example is the big data and the mobile network operators. A lot happened and is happening with mobile network operators data to understand mobility patterns during these times of COVID-19. But it is not a straightforward data source to use, and it does not provide the gender breakdown, although that information must exist somewhere in their files, because when you register, you say if you are a man or a woman, and they register your name, things like that. So they must be there somewhere. So with the development of big data in transport mobility, we could hope to have access somehow to a gender breakdown through these mobile network operators. There are also a series of registers that can provide some information on the gender. For example, car ownership register, driving licenses, car insurance companies, train tickets also, you have to register if you're a man or a woman. Public transport travel cards, for the same reasons, can probably provide that information. But unfortunately, none of these provides the full picture, obviously. But they would already be a good input if we could get hold of them. But the ideal for us would be to have the data collected directly by the national statistical offices. But this seems impossible without a strong political decision, because the whole data collection network will have to be reviewed or adapted. Data collection techniques will have to be redesigned. And this would require major investment and additional human resources. And this does not seem realistic, neither in terms of cost nor in terms of immediate feasibility. However, if there could be a strong political decision, we would then start moving towards bridging the gap. And there are a few concrete examples of this, like in the UK, Sweden, or Canada. Some countries even made it mandatory that any new project must address the gender issue. So this is an important step to start integrating solutions and laying foundation to step-by-step bridge the gap. So what's the possible role? ITF works as an international platform where we can exchange ideas, share views and solutions. It is a place to enrich the community with shared experiences. So based on each one's experience, such an international platform allows to highlight reasons for the gap, because understanding the reasons is essential to design a solution. It also allows to describe challenges to fill the gap. The experience of each one is critical to understand the challenges and how to face them. It also allows to expose existing improvements, and sharing improvements in concrete projects are precious case studies to suggest a way forward. And of course, such a platform is a place to benchmark results and suggest common solutions. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mario. We have a Q&A after Wei Xuan's presentation. So I would now invite Wei Xuan to give us a presentation on the gender analysis toolkit for transport policies that ITF is developing. Dr. Wei Xuan is an advisor on the sustainable transport and global outreach in the ITF. And she has a background in transport emissions and behavioral modeling, and leads the development of transport and climate change policy dialogue, gender research, as well as activities in Southeast Asia at the ITF. So over to you, Wei Xuan.
Thank you very much, Prajop, and thank you, ADB colleagues, for initiating this conversation. And we're all very delighted to be here today and to continue our discussion on gender analysis in transport, in the transport sector. And so my presentation will go over the new project that we're currently developing on the toolkit for transport policies. So we have done some original research at the ITF since 2018. And as Yari has mentioned, a lot of our work has been focused on understanding travel behavior by gender, as well as understanding the gender gap in the transport workforce. And so in our research on travel behavior by gender, we've selected 8 different cities, and the selection of the cities were definitely constrained by the availability of data. We have actually used very detailed household travel survey data in order to conduct this analysis, looking at how mode choice, as well as other variables, could actually be influenced by gender. And through this exercise, we've actually realized that we do need better data, because even in cities with available data, a lot of them aren't comparable with other cities. And a more recent study that we have published last year is on the gender dimension of the transport workforce. And again, data was a constraint in understanding some of the nuances in the gender gaps in the transport workforce, understanding why it exists, and also policy insights to actually improve the gender equality in the transport sector itself. And so Yari has already mentioned that in our analysis, we found that only 17% of the transport workforce is female. This was derived from the statistics available in 2018. And as you can see, there were only data available for 46 countries. And so we've realized that there is a greater need to work on getting better data, more reliable and more relevant data to better understand the gender dimension in the transport sector. And so I also want to highlight that the 17% of the gender workforce is not universal across different regions of the world. So as you can see, in Asia, this percentage is a lot lower. And of course, there are other regions that are higher, but none of them actually exceeds 25%, which shows that the sector is still very much a male-dominated sector. And of course, this percentage varies by transport job divisions. And there are definitely transport job divisions that have a higher female participation rate, such as aviation and postal and courier activities. And this is largely due to for aviation, this is largely due to the high percentage of women workers as ground staff and as flight attendants, but not so much in some of the higher ranking positions, including pilots. And if you look at the lower end of the spectrum, land transport is still lagging behind with only about 10% of female participation rate. And so what does all this mean? And well, in addition to creating better data collection processes and identifying the kind of data to collect, we also need to make sure that we actually engage with other stakeholders beyond the transport sector. And so as Mario has also mentioned, this could also imply working with other ministries in order to have a better picture of the transport workforce. And so this all leads to the rationale for the development of a gender analysis toolkit for transport policies. And this idea was actually developed based on some of our discussions with our member countries, as well as international organizations. And we do believe that gender analysis is the first step towards better gender equality in the sector. And it is often used as a process to identify, understand, and describe gender differences and the relevance of gender. And because the transport sector is still a male-dominated sector, we do hope that by including more gender analysis in transport policies itself, we could actually help bridge the gap. And this process would also include the analysis of different impact of the same policies on women and men, which would then require the collection of gender disaggregated data or gender sensitive data. And of course, the ultimate goal is to also better understand the effectiveness of transport policies and how they could actually, how their impact could actually vary. And so this project was also based on ITF's approach to gender analysis. So I'll not go into the detail, but again, it is actually based on our work on travel behavior by gender, and also some of the questions that we have in gender equality in the transport workforce, and of course the linkages between the two, because these two areas are definitely interconnected. We do believe that having a more diverse transport workforce would actually help develop more equitable transport services. And so this is a snapshot of our scope of work within this new project, and a tentative timeline. And so the first component, so there are five components within this project. And the first is to really understand some of the data and statistics that are currently being developed by our countries. And Mario is leading some of these conversations with our member countries. And we are also in the process of developing an ideal list of indicators that could actually help guide some of our member countries in answering some of their questions. So some of our preliminary conversations with our member countries have led to this question of what kind of data should they actually be collecting? What kind of gender specific data should they be collecting, and how? And so we do hope to address some of these issues in our project. And we are also developing a questionnaire that my colleague Magda is leading. So this questionnaire includes policies, gender related policies that are being implemented or being designed in transport, as well as statistics and data that are being collected by our member countries. And the third component is to really look at the data collection process itself. Are there any changes that we need to make in current data collection processes? What are some improvements that we could actually recommend to countries? And of course, this includes maybe better survey design, or the development of complementary platforms for better data collection processes. And the fifth component is to really pull from all this different other components, the previous four components, and to really derive guiding principles that could help develop a gender analysis framework for transport policies. And as Samantha has mentioned earlier, I think this would then help improve gender mainstreaming in transport. And so we do hope that the toolkit itself would actually help other countries, not just ITF member countries. And this is also an area where we would like to continue to learn from the ADB, and to also see what are some of our, both of our member countries could actually develop further. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishwan. Very interesting presentation. So we have about 5 minutes for taking about 2-3 questions. If you have any questions, please raise your hand, and we'll ask you to turn on your video and ask the question. And meanwhile, I have a question for you, Vishwan, because it's a very interesting, but one questions that come to mind is that how in this pandemic, your data is being collected. And we also have one colleague who raised her hand, Elisabetta Gentile. So I'll also ask Elisabetta to just quickly, turn on her video and audio and ask her question.
Thank you so much, Prabjot. I have a very quick question concerning the data science or big data approach to collecting gender transport data, gender-based transport data. In particular, how this effort would interact with a series of data privacy legislation and other types of concerns, especially when it comes to transferability of this data from one jurisdiction to another. I see this as a potential roadblock to unleashing the potential of data science and big data techniques to understand better gender-related patterns in transportation. Thank you.
Over to you, Vishwan.
So thank you very much for the questions. So in terms of big data, we've actually just conducted a workshop on gender bias in big data collection for transport. And so we have to share more information on the outcomes of that specific event. But we do realize that it is an issue, especially when we are facing, the sector itself is evolving and that we are actually using a lot of big data and machine learning that would actually shape future transport policies. And this is definitely an area that we are currently exploring and looking at ways to improve this process in order to eliminate or reduce gender bias. And I would also like to invite other colleagues from the ITF to share other comments. And Prajab, regarding your question on the pandemic data collection during the pandemic, I think Mario, you may have some insights as well, but we do have a very structured process of collecting data and statistics from our member countries, and I don't think that has been affected by the pandemic. So, but Mario, you may want to add in more comments.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Mario, yes.
Yeah, I think the pandemic, brought a lot of difficulties, I would say, to collect information. But at the same time, it was a way, an urgent way or critical way to collect information that we're not getting elsewhere, and it opened many doors on other ways or other possibilities to collect different types of information. And gender is certainly one, but there are a few examples where the crisis rushed a little bit and put people under pressure to collect any kind of data because they were lacking all of it or most of it. So the gender was not like a priority in that case. And most of the time, a lot of information was collected, for example, on active mobility, which was a sector that didn't exist before, basically, or very hard to collect information. But unfortunately, the gender issue was not addressing that. We're just collecting the information that they could get quickly, and the gender issue was like at a second stage that will come later on. Now that we know that there are different possibilities to collect that information, then we will look into it, I think, after the pandemic when things will be calmer. So there are different pros and cons, that the pandemic brought in the data collection. I don't know if that answered the question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mario. So, we are just going 3 minutes over time, but we also have one more interesting question. So if Veshwen or Mario, you can answer that. It's from our colleague Noor Filza. And the question is, what are the examples of gender-specific data that countries can easily start collecting right now?
Do you want me to take that, Veshwen? That depends on the countries, and there are different cases of the policies they're trying to address, and they can focus on specific information. Of course, we cannot have a a global picture of all the possibilities in the transport activity and collect gender in each of those cases. I think we'll have to move step by step. So, so there are a lot of interest recently with this active mobility I just mentioned, because it's a major interest immediately, and the gender issue could be addressed there. And I think the UK is trying to work on this. The UK is one of those examples where they didn't manage to get their gender because they didn't address the question, but I'm convinced, the information was in the data that they had, but in the emergency, they didn't have time to focus on this issue. But they have the data and they have to process it to be able to isolate the cases and bring the gender issue in the front row. So it depends on the policies of countries and the efforts they want to put in to collect the information. But a lot is feasible. Things are possible. As I said, there are different cases where we can find the gender segregated data. There are different possibilities, registers, and insurance companies and things like this where the information exists. We just need the willingness and the resources to look into that.
Perhaps if I may add at a very small point on that one to answer the question of what could be the easy starting point. What we have found is that the labor statistics are a good starting point for looking at gender in transport side specifically, where this data are collected mostly already. So that's one area where you can start quite quickly. Another one is road safety, where the accident statistics do have the gender dimension quite often set there. So at least those two are quite good starting points for collecting gender-based data. And then travel surveys, which do have that gender aspect as well. So those three I would identify as a starting point for collecting that.
And just one more quick comment. So I think it's really important to bear in mind that every element or every data that has to do with behavior has a gender dimension. And that includes travel distance, travel time, or trip of purpose of trip, and so forth. So it's really important to collect this aggregated data, and that could actually be a starting point just by bearing in mind that anything that has to do with behavior has the gender dimension.
Thank you, Yadi, Mario, and Vaishwin. And we also have some interesting questions coming in the chat. And I would request, Vaishwin and Mario, if you can respond in the chat also, while we move on to the next session, where we have two speakers from ADB presenting in the next session. So first, I will invite our colleague Malika Shagazatova. Malika is a social development specialist, gender and development in the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department. And she will be talking about gender and quality infrastructure investments, measuring women's economic empowerment work. Over to you, Malika.
Yes, thank you, Prabjot. So let me start with that, significant percentage of ADB's portfolio is comprised of investment in infrastructure. And of course, transport sector is a big part of it. For example, in 2019, 35%, in 2020, 10% of overall ADB's lending portfolio was in transport sector. And as some has already mentioned, we in ADB know that infrastructure is not gender neutral, and do not expect that our infrastructure development project will automatically benefit women and girls, men and boys equally. We know that sometimes gender-blind infrastructure may have a negative impact on women and girls, preventing them from accessing essential services, benefiting from employment opportunities, or having negative impact on women's safety, or further exacerbate the unpaid care work. And at the same time, our experience shows that when infrastructure development project designs in gender responsive and inclusive way, they are likely to improve women's mobility, support access to markets, education, employment opportunities, and potentially has broader impact on longer term transformative gender changes. As Sam mentioned in her opening remarks, we in ADB have high commitment on gender equality with corporate targets at entry, at project approvals, but also at exit, at project completion. We also have set of tracking indicators that enable us to systematically measure our performance. And for operational priority 2, which is on accelerating progress on gender equality, this indicator track project results around 5 key areas on women's economic empowerment, gender equality in human capital, leadership and decision making, time poverty, and women's resilience to external shocks. So measuring gender equality results in ADB operations have been and continues to be a priority area, and we recognize that strategic alignment of corporate results framework indicators on gender equality have played an important role in enhancing the focus of gender in all our operations across our sovereign and private sector operations. So in 2020, for example, 67% of all our project and transport sector were gender mainstream by number. So they were categorized with 2 of the highest gender categories in ADB, gender equity theme or effective gender mainstreaming, and they were using gender action plan as a gender mainstreaming tool. So as part of the gender mainstreaming work, we integrate gender-related performance indicators in infrastructure development projects and in transport projects with the gender designs that are mostly focusing on practical benefits. And these designs and tracking indicators are also aligned with our corporate tracking indicators. Some examples that could be improving women's access to skilled jobs that are generated by project both during construction works or in operation and maintenance, support of skills development to promote women's employment in non-traditional skilled jobs, for example, as technicians in a bus parks or tram park or a bus and train drivers, and also enhancing gender responsive features of transport infrastructure that would address issues that are related to access, gender responsive services, or there are many projects, especially in the urban development, that are addressing GBV and sexual harassment in public transport. At the same time, while there is an increasing evidence on how gender designs can improve women and girls' access to infrastructure, there has been very limited data and analysis on how gender responsive infrastructure can lead to women's empowerment. How gender designs in the projects that we are incorporating in the project go beyond, as a result, go beyond increasing practical benefits for women and girls and contribute to strategic or transformative benefits, such as, for example, women's increased decision-making capacity of their own lives, health, income, shifting discriminatory social norms, or supporting more equitable status quo, within the household, communities, organizations that we are working together, or in the overall in the society. So recognizing this gap, we are in the process of initiating a study that we are planning to commission towards the end of this year to better understand the overall theory of change and identify the most appropriate interventions in infrastructure development projects that would have a stronger linkages to women empowerment. So we can further understand how some project designs would generate longer-term transformative women empowerment results. The important part of this study will be looking at, as I said, stronger linkages between project practical results that we include in the project and women empowerment that can be also assessed and to capture in cost-effective way, which is you were talking about, budgets and numbers, and these are some of the limitations. So we need to find the indicators that would be able, that we will be able to capture in cost-effective ways, quantitatively or qualitatively at the project outcome and impact level, and would also complement, to existing knowledge on direct and indirect project benefits. So specifically, as a result of this study, we want to identify a set of core indicators which would complement and add value to existing measurements that we already have by looking at project outcomes and impact. So as part of the preparation for this study, we've started small collaborative initiative with Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and Islamic Development Bank, the Center of Global Development, SGD, and Data2X. The objective of this kind of pilot initiative, at a small pilot, it's trial, would be to identify possible indicators which would best measure women empowerment in the context of infrastructure development, specifically in transport sector, but with the focus on road development projects. So as part of this initiative with CGD, there will be a review of existing corporate gender targets that we have across 3 MDBs for possible indicators measuring women empowerment outcomes, and analysis of existing gender performance indicator in transport sector across all 3 MDBs projects. We already selected a set of projects for this work. So this joint activity is an initial point of the study, of the bigger study, and it's building on the recent report measuring women's economic empowerment, compendium of selected tools, which was prepared by CGD and published last year in November. So this report provides a compilation of selected tools for measuring women empowerment, and it will be used to help to identify a core set of indicators that road subsector development projects can support and result in women empowerment. So as a result of this initiative, we hope to have a set of proposed high level, and I was saying outcome and impact level, indicators to measure women's empowerment through gender responsive infrastructure that could be further integrated into MDB's investment. The results of this pilot will be further discussed with participation of all 3 MDBs. That will also inform the final conceptual framework in terms of reference for the study that we are planning to commission at the end of this year. We'll be happy to share further information about this initiative with the ITF colleagues in due course. Thank you.
Thank you, Malika. For our second presentation, we have our colleague Elisabetta Gentile, who's an economist in the Economic Research and Regional Cooperation Department. And she will be sharing with us about an interesting research on transport, urban labor markets, and women's mobility. So over to you, Elisabetta.
Thank you, Prabjot. Allow me to share my screen. So you should be able to see my presentation right now. Can you see the presentation clearly?
Yes.
Yes, we
All
can.
Right, then I will start. Well, thank you. Thank you for confirming. So I don't have much time, so I'm just going to give you a quick overview of this transportation for employment project that we had ongoing for about 5 to 6 years now. And we are beginning to produce some outputs on this project. So the presentation will be structured as follows. I'm going to give you the broader context and then discuss a little bit the gender dimension, although this is a group that is very knowledgeable on the issue. So I will just discuss this very briefly. And then I will just focus for a little while on the ongoing research involving ADB, in particular, one of the studies that is near completion and should be published later this year. Starting with the broader context, there is a wealth of research activities that flourished within the context of this 2007 transit plan that was initially unveiled and then shelved in 2018 due to a change in political administration, and at that point was thought as dead in the water. As you can see, it's very ambitious with multiple lines crossing the city north to south and east to west. Then in 2012, 2013, the government built very quickly one part of this project, which is the Green Line, and it's it's a bus rapid transit, as you can see from the picture, with dedicated overpasses. And it's obviously a substantial physical investment that is unlikely to be reversed. And the second line from this project, from this plan, was built between 2016 and 2020. If I'm not mistaken, there is ADB funding from the regional department Central West on this infrastructure, as well as other infrastructure in other cities in Pakistan. Within this broader context, the Center for Economic Research in Pakistan, also known as CERP, has partnered with multiple institutions, ADB being one of them, to engage in several research projects related to transport with a gender dimension. So the most important element that underpins this ambitious research agenda is the collection of rich household and establishment level microdata. So I will discuss this a bit more in detail later, but this is really original and rich data that has been collected that supports several of these research projects. So the gender dimension, this pie chart shows you a representative sample of the Punjab, urban Punjab region, where the city of Lahore is located in Pakistan. And it shows you that in 2006-2007, only 19% of women in this area, in urban Punjab, declared they were employed. More than a quarter of them declared that they would like to work if they could find a suitable job. And suitable job does not necessarily refer only to the job description itself, but to the circumstances, such as how to get there and what kind of facilities are at work, etc., etc. Needless to say that within conservative contexts, women are more constrained than men in their physical mobility due to safety and social norms. And on your left-hand side, you can see a picture of bus riders, and they are pretty much all male. And on the right-hand side, you can see an example of a woman that is only likely to leave the house when with her husband or another male member of the family. So what is the ongoing research, the part that involves ADB? Because as I was telling you before, this is a huge research project. Well, we have one working paper that is slated to be published by the end of 2021 on women's mobility and labor supply, experimental evidence from Pakistan. And this is by Erica Field and Kate Viborny. And this is the study that I will spend a little time talking to you about. The second is a policy brief. They will look at a different aspect. They will look at facilities in the Pakistani workplace and gender perspective. So that also explores what determines women's labor force participation, but more from the point of view of what are the obstacles in the workplace. Then there is a working paper on job search and gender in Lahore. Again, we are going to use some of these amazing data sets being created to look at what are the factors that determine women's labor force participation in Lahore. The latter two, the number two and number three are expected either in 2021 or in 2022. So the first study that I showed you is a randomized control trial on labor supply impact of constraints on women's mobility. So of course, we already know that there is an abundant literature on constraints to women mobility affecting women's access to education. There is a bit less work on the effect of these constraints on women's labor market participation and other labor market outcomes. So this is what this study seeks to shed some light on. What are the economic benefits of policies enhancing women's mobility, such as safer streets or high quality public transport? So this is the policy implications of this work. So what are the challenges of this study? Number one is to make the entire journey safe and acceptable for women. Second is that there are thousands of possible firms, each with small probability of a job match. So the study on women's labor mobility has to be able to eliminate the mobility constraint to many places, in order to allow all these possible firms to participate. The third challenge is to identify the effect of safety and acceptability of transport from the actual cost of transport. And then the fourth challenge is to include in the sample also women who are not currently working on searching because of mobility constraints. So where is this coming from? It's coming from the fact that often, due to lack of data, studies follow only women who are currently looking for jobs. So this is a biased sample of women, because these are women who obviously don't face the same obstacles of all these other women who maybe would like to work, but they cannot because of mobility constraints. And finally, the last two are ensure that participants understand what jobs they can reach, and women may be willing to work but not get jobs for other reasons. So here we may not be able to observe what are the other constraints that women might be facing, separate from safe and socially acceptable transportation. So the intervention in this randomized control trial is this safe commute service. You can see a picture of what these vans look like. So we address challenge number 1 and number 2 by making the entire journey safe and acceptable to as many as possible job matches by using these vans. This is a subscription-based door-to-door pick and drop commute service. And it's provided by large transportation companies, and it extends to everybody, as many employers as possible, even small firms. An employee can choose to opt in and pay the monthly subscription. And then we have a two-sided randomization by neighborhood for firms and job seekers. So the design of the randomized control trial is that addresses the effect of safety acceptability of transport separate from the cost of transport. So transportation versus commuting, men versus women. And so we are looking at both, gender differences in mobility constraint, as well as, based on transport and based on cost. Women, we have two treatment groups. The first one is offered a female-only private van transportation to or from work. And this is both safe and socially acceptable. It is also obviously convenient. The second treatment group is offered mixed, women and men are offered mixed gender private transportation service. So this is convenient, but no longer necessarily safe or socially acceptable. And then there is a cross-randomized discount in the price of the service, of the transportation service, to see how the cost of transportation also affects the labor supply. So there is an element that I want to focus on here, the importance of having a representative sample. Again, as I was saying before, there are many studies that begin with a sample of individuals, men or women, depending on the study, who are already searching. But this particular study starts with the representative listing of households and invites all members to sign up for a job search service. This job search service is also managed by the research team at the Center of Economic Research for Economic Research in Pakistan, and it's the basis, again, of a multitude of research initiatives. There are more than 10,000 people who signed up for this service. So starting with a representative sample addresses challenge number 4, which is including individuals who are not working or searching because of mobility constraint, the so-called latent labor supply. And this is how this job matching service between employers and employees, to which the randomization of the transport service can be added, is done through this platform, again, designed, created, and managed by the research team at the Center for Economic Research in Pakistan. It's called Job Talash, which in Urdu literally means job search. Basically, again, we had more than 10,000 individuals who signed up, both male and female. There are 500 firms who agreed to post ads, very diverse positions, from sweeper to HR managers. Candidates receive job announcements through SMS when they meet basic qualifications and express interest in this particular occupation. So the first outcome of interest is to see if applicant I applies to job J through the call center. And this is created in a data set of administrative data that has approximately 1 million possible applications to date. There are also ongoing surveys of firms and job seekers to measure off-platform search and downstream outcomes. So as I was saying before, again, this is a massive data collection effort. And therefore it's spurring several different research projects. What are the results to date? This graph very quickly summarizes them. As you can see, when women are offered female-only transport at base price, basically the impact in terms of applying for jobs is close to zero and statistically insignificant. So it looks like cost of the service is also a major element. When women are offered the female-only transport and medium discount, again, you can see already that the impact on their probability to apply for a position is positive and statistically significant. When they are offered female-only transport at a larger discount, the effect becomes larger, albeit a little less statistically significant. And then again, as you can see, the importance of social acceptability and safety when they are offered mixed transport. The impact is much smaller and closer to zero, albeit again, the cost factor is important in the sense that they are more likely to take it if it's discounted, and it becomes also more statistically significant. So,
hi, Elisabetta.
Yes.
Sorry, can we request you to close?
It's
now?
finished. I'm done. This is the second to last slide. So to summarize, there are no positive effects on men. Subsidized female-only transport of basically quadruple the application rate for women. Social and safety constraints are key for women. So to conclude, this is really a rare case in which we have both internal validity, that is the rigor of the research approach, but also external validity, because there are incredible amount of policy lessons that can be implemented in other similarly socially conservative contexts. And with this, I finish my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very interesting, and I'm sure there would be many questions. So we encourage everyone to type in your questions that can be taken at the end of the next session, for which I will hand over to my colleague Pamela. She will be moderating now. Thank you. Over to you, Pamela.
Thank you very much, Prajot. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pamela Chan from the Transport Sector Group. Prajot Vaishan and I have been talking about this great initiative from ITF, and it's truly fantastic to see this come together today to bring together our specialists from both sides to discuss how to take forward this important topic on gender and transport. So in this segment, we have lined up speakers from our operations departments who are promoting and making gender equality happen on the ground through direct investments in transport projects. Time is tight, but we are delighted to have colleagues working across all regions as well as our private sector operations to join us today. As we're running a little over time, we will invite each speaker for a brief sharing of about 3 minutes, which is slightly shorter than we originally planned. Apologies for that. But we'll take any questions that you may have at the end, so please send in your questions through the chat box. First up, let me introduce Mr. Francesco Tonieri, Principal Social Development Specialist from our South Asia department. And I see, Francesco, you have your video on. Thank you very much. Could you please share with us some good practices on gender and transport in South Asia? Over to you, please, Francesco.
Thank you very much. And we started 3 minutes. So South Asia includes 6 countries. I understand only India is a member of the ITF, maybe a consideration to be made. Key areas of focus are improvement of state-rural road networks and connectivity. Key areas of collaboration, increasingly railway, but also metro systems offer great opportunity for gender equality and social inclusion mainstreaming. We are, as a department, South Asia, involved in the finalization of transport and urban transport master plans. You can discuss with the transport colleagues on this. From a gender equality and social inclusion perspective, what we expect from a toolkit such as yours, because it's already in our toolkit prepared a few years ago, is basically suggesting an entry point to do what we call the JZ strategy, which we are increasingly supporting in the developing member countries. In particular, Ministry of Physical Infrastructure and Transport in Nepal is a good practice. We are working with the World Bank, looking forward to post-COVID on Chennai Gender Lab, which in urban transport offers opportunity for cross-fertilization. So bottom line, a first suggestion to the ITF team, the SARJC guidances that we are doing for the sector agencies should be, in our views, complemented by global practices referring yours. I'd like to emphasize the focus of the department beyond gender equality, focusing our mandate extend to both social inclusion and gender equality in the context of South Asia. Hence, it is a very important point, particularly for disability and old age. We expect, and the government and the clients expect us to provide data that go well beyond the disaggregation by gender, but that address intersecting dimension of disability, old age, and increasingly social and social identity and sexual orientation and gender identities as well. The sector diagnostic for selected sectors are available. They are a South Asia good practice. You can access online and are normally traditionally endorsed by government. So second suggestion to the ITF team, the tools, whatever you do is an advocacy tool, it should be validated by the user. Disability and old age, I think I emphasize the critical importance for us in the government's dialogue. We do deliver JZ action plan, gender equality and social inclusion action plans in almost, at this point, 100% of the gender equity and effective gender mainstreaming categorized projects in South Asia. We do have a JZ framework coming up by the end of 2021, and we will endeavor to build on any other existing, including yours, guidelines to inform policy dialogue at the sector level. For to last, our best practice, India Delhi Meerut. Why? Because it mobilized additional $3 million to address women's mobility preceding the construction of the metro, and also address disability, old age, and sexual identity and gender, sexual orientation and gender identity of Soji community, which is an emerging area where we are called to deliver. Second good practice, Mumbai Metro, you can find it online, and iRoad Sri Lanka. Why? Because we do have good baseline. And if the baseline are owned by the client, and if your guidelines or whatever gender toolkits provide a clear entry points on data collection, I think you will have a stronger impact of the of the gender toolkit that you are developing. And last but not least, echoing the colleague Elisabetta, we are very obviously switching a little bit the focus from a entry to a exit. We are very concerned about assessing the socioeconomic impact on gender equality and the social inclusion, and we're working with the Economic Research Department. So a suggestion that you pay equal attention to both qualitative entry, policy dialogue, but also assessment of the socioeconomic impact on a broad range of users, because that's what the DMCs require. So, and particularly address the critical issue of randomized control trials that Elisabetta mentioned versus new methodologies such as the nimble methodology that are emerging in the economic jargon, and which are very practical and cheaper, if you see, for use by the transport community. That's pretty much my feedback to you. 4 minutes, sorry for the delay.
No worries. Thank you very much, Francesco. I just wanted to say that we have one of the largest transport portfolio investments in South Asia region. So, it was a lot of information to fit within 3 to 4 minutes. So thank you so much, Francesco, for joining us. Next up, we have Ms. Veronica Joffrey from she's Social Development Specialist from our East Asia Department. Veronica, thank you. I see you have your video on now. Over to you, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Pamela and colleagues, for inviting us to share experiences today, coming basically from applying a social inclusion, as Francesco has mentioned, as well as a gender equality perspective in transport in the East Asia region. For our colleagues from ITF, East Asia for ADB comprises the People's Republic of China and Mongolia. Yes, my name is Veronica Mendizabal Joffre. I lead the gender program at ADB for the East Asia region, and my colleague Arun Ramamurthy, a senior infrastructure specialist focusing on high tech and digital innovation, is also with us. We will present an example of our growing use of user-centered approaches to promote gender equality in the transport sector and at the project level. So human-centered design is a methodology that emphasizes the understanding of user needs as key cues to promote innovation. When following this approach, insights come from directly engaging and observing the users, and this is the basis for exploring breakthrough opportunities to provide improved services and infrastructure. For us in East Asia, a key focus is to make public transport and non-motorized transport as well the preferred modes of travel. These can help reduce congestion, pollution, and make cities more livable. So for this, the challenge really is to be able to design transport systems that are inclusive to the whole spectrum of users, be it women, men, different age groups, including a growing share of the elderly users in China, for example, in particular, and also younger users that are more tech-oriented as well. So we have started using this approach in China, and we are also expanding the application of user-centered approaches, design thinking approaches in Mongolia. But rather than me speaking about this, let us show you a bit of what we're actually talking about. And we're going to be sharing the specific experience of the Guiyang Intelligent Transport System project in PRC. And after the video, Arun, the team leader of this project, and me, we will be very happy to answer any question that you have specifically on the aspects presented in this video and our use of user-centered approaches in general. Thank you, and over to you, Pamela, to screen the video now.
Thank you very much, Veronica. So requesting Noel to please load the video. Thank you.
When it comes to making cities more livable, infrastructure planning can leave ordinary people alienated from a process that will impact heavily on their lives. This is where human-centered design comes in. With human-centered design, the focus is on making these huge projects more responsive to people's needs by engaging them up front and drawing inspiration from them. ADB is helping the People's Republic of China develop an intelligent transport system and sustainable transport infrastructure in Guiyang, a new district established in Guizhou province in 2014. With rapid change from farming to tech, the intelligent transport system will help Guiyang avoid the fate of many traffic-choked cities by making public transport comfortable, safe, accessible, and efficient, encouraging people to leave their cars at home. Here are some of the intelligent transport system ideas that came out of the human-centered design process. The intelligent transport system will help people easily navigate where they want to go, notify them when to leave, enable gadgets that track users through GPS, giving live travel information and allowing responsible adults to track the progress and safety of young children and the elderly. At the bus stop, things couldn't be easier. And on the bus, it's stress-free travel. People will be able to report incidents and experiences to make the intelligent transport system smarter and more responsive in real time. The data generated by the intelligent transport system will be open, creating further opportunities for businesses to offer additional services, bringing more convenience to commuters. To accelerate the development of apps and services, the project will sponsor hackathons on themes like road safety, disability inclusion, and green mobility. To get school-age girls excited about the intelligent transport system, the project will run coding camps, hoping to inspire future data scientists and engineers. Human-centered design. By giving people a voice, we're making cities more livable.
Thank you very much for sharing that video. Human-centered design is really interesting concept, I find personally, because transport systems, I feel, do not exist to serve itself, right? It's to serve the user. So definitely it should be designed around user needs. And in ADB, we're not just starting to look at human-centered design, we're also applying futures and foresight approaches to design the future pipeline of investment projects. So with this, let us maybe move on to the next speaker. We have Ms. Anne Valco, Social Development Specialist from our Private Sector Operations. And over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and hi, everyone. So my name is Anne Valco-Celestino. I'm a gender specialist in the Private Sector Operations Department. And we cover the whole region, so the whole Asia and the Pacific, no country specifics. But what we see in the private sector projects in terms of transport, it is the similar unfortunate challenges that we hear from the different speakers today in terms of access, the safety, providing equal opportunities for women in the transport sector broadly, and also having construction transport being at high risk for gender-based violence and other harassment issues, right? So how we work in our projects is we work with the teams, investment teams and the clients to identify the gender measures that aim to addressing these issues on project by project basis, and really to emphasize here that we define the gender indicators together with the clients to make sure that what we provision in the project, it's actions that the clients understand and want to undertake. Having said that, in private sector, we don't have so many transport projects in general, maybe more on energy and other infrastructure, but over the last year or so, we've had maybe 4 projects, and the good news is that with gender mainstreaming was successful in all of these projects. Out of the 4, we had like 3 effective gender mainstreaming and 1 with some gender elements. I will highlight some of the key meaningful gender measures in a second, but just also to indicate that we appreciate also the value of having gender toolkits to guide teams and clients in these projects. So we also planning to develop in the very near future a tip sheet that on gender in transport sector that would specifically speak to and be tailored to private sector operations. So that's something we value and we look to having. And we will have a CEO talk series, and we're looking to having a transport company as well talk about how they're addressing gender in that sector to also act as an industry thought leader and so forth. So that's some of the initiatives we are also promoting at PSOD to get the discussion broader than the usual in transport. Now, I just wanted to share from some of the projects we had, some of the I think meaningful and not so common indicators or measures that we have with clients. And for example, we have one project with Fiji Airways that was approved earlier this year. And remarkable that they were willing to commit so much on the gender, despite the financial distress that they're going through as an airline company, right, in those times. But what is interesting, for example, is that we're able to work with them to having them train female cadets in their new Fiji Aviation Academy. So that's something also very interesting to follow. And in addition to developing the anti-sexual harassment policy and diversity inclusion policy, to having a family violence policy that is a key gender issue in Fiji. If I come to the Georgian Railway that was recently approved, it is a state-owned company that has also very low participation of women in their company, and recognizing that they recognized during our discussions with them that it was very hard to attract female candidates. So what we are doing with them is to work with the Railway Academy they're sponsoring, to having more interns and students accessing also some of the job opportunities at the company, and also help them boost the safety measures, not just regarding people with disabilities, but specifically for women and girls, not only through having communication boards displayed at the train stations and so forth. Maybe one more within the time, it's in India, the Delhi-Bidkon highway that we had approved late last year. Similarly, measures regarding local jobs with gender equality improved, and sexual exploitations measures. But two of them interesting is having 100% of the paramedics associated with the expanded road being women, and having a zero tolerance policy against sexual harassment that goes beyond the staff, but also covers contractors, casual workers, community members, service users. That is also something that we don't find usually from companies, right, to go beyond their workforce. We have interesting prospects coming up. We're looking to also expand the gender design that we have with them. We're looking at indicators regarding women returning to the workforce after maternal leave with some of their clients, having procurement with women-owned enterprises in the terminals, for example. And yeah, having security personnel associated with the new roads having been women. So many different enterprises we're exploring always with the clients, and I think that covers the issues, and that I'll end here. Happy to take any questions, provide more details. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And my favorite was the training of cadets in the Fiji Airways, and I think that ties in so nicely with one of the statistics that our ITF colleague Wei Shen shared on the low participation rates in aviation. So thank you very much. Nice to hear the exciting initiatives in the private sector operations. Now, next up, we have Ms. Claire Luxon, Gender Consultant representing Southeast Asia Department. And Claire, can we request you to share with us briefly, as our time is also running out? Thank you very much. Claire, over to you, please. Thank you.
Hi, yeah, good afternoon. So I'm from the Philippine Country Office. I'm the National Gender Consultant there, and I'm in charge of the Malolos-Clark Railway Project, which will be the subject matter of my discussion. The Malolos-Clark Railway Project, MCRP, is the single biggest project financing for ADB in the Philippines and Asia, involving $2.75 billion facility. So it's a flagship project for both ADB and the Philippines. So I'm going to discuss some we believe are emerging good practices in the Malolos-Clark project. So one of them during the project design is the involvement early on of the Gender and Development Focal Point System of the Department of Transportation, which is the executing and implementing agency. The GAD-FPS is actually a mechanism existing under Philippine laws where there are GAD groups or experts within each agency. So we made sure that at project design, we have involved them. And usually, like everywhere else, gender folks are in the margins. So they are also usually in the margins in their agency themselves. So bringing them in as part of the project design team for the gender analysis and gender action plan was for them a welcome development, because it increases their influence and prestige within the organization. But also for the project, we have benefited greatly from their wisdom. And also they have created guidelines, gender mainstreaming guidelines in the rail sector, which they drafted, and we're waiting for that to be approved. But then because the project came in and used that work that they used, that output that they did, then it sort of it sort of facilitated the approval of that document, which was sitting for a long time within the agency. So it was taken up by the management of the agency and approved, no? And it was the project that facilitated that. So it's a symbiotic relationship between the project and the gender focal point system within the organization, within the EAIA. So that's one. Also because of that, the GAD guidelines created by the group, the GAD focal point system, we were able to also introduce a lot of new gender responsive design features in the infrastructure for the railways. This includes, among others, well, barriers, for instance, in train platforms. Of course, this is very common in other countries, but not in the Philippines. Toilet facilities at 1:2 ratio for male to female toilets. I'm sure you know the issue that is being, we're trying to address in that ratio. We have all gender toilets for, of course, usually for transgender who have, nowhere to go. We have breastfeeding rooms and facilities in both and breastfeeding rooms and facilities in the train stations and depots, child changing facilities in men and women's toilets, not just the women's toilet, but men's toilets also. Talk about, redistribution of care work, and private rooms for processing of complaints for GBV, complaints of commuters. Okay, so that's the involvement and result of the involvement of the GAD FPS. We have also introduced in the Malolos Clark Railway project a provision in the Gender Action Plan that says provide a prevention response mechanism for sexual harassment and other forms of gender-based violence during project implementation and O&M. So that's provided for in the Gender Action Plan. During the implementation, the department, the IA, took this further, and they have not just included a mechanism in the grievance redress mechanism, but also came up with the DOTR GBV guidelines. And within these guidelines, among others, are the response mechanisms to GBV, no? GBV in the context of civil works, GBV SEA in the context of civil works, GBV SEA in the context of O&M. And the most important thing about this mechanism is that it strengthens the already existing mechanisms at the local level, at the IA level, at the contractors company level, to respond to GBV SEA. It doesn't, ADB did not take it upon itself to be the one responding to complaints for GBV SEA, but ADB committed to strengthen these mechanisms in order that they will be able to address and respond to GBV SEA. So I'm running out of time, but I just want to emphasize that the good practice that we're trying to develop here is the maximization of existing mechanisms and processes within the government. And this is the GAD FPS and the DOTR GAD guidelines, as well as the GBV SEA response mechanisms in the local governments, in the IA, and as well as in the private contractor.
Thank you very much, Claire. I'm so sorry we have to stop you there. So much good information and participatory approach, all very good and important for gender inclusion. We have one final panelist speaker. May we invite her, Claire, to join us, and to just, Claire, if you could make it very quick as we are running over time, please. Thank you very much. Perhaps in 2 minutes, please. Thank you.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gladys Franco. I represent the Central and West Asia Department. I think the first point that I'd like to share is the emphasis that the department puts on conducting the poverty, social, and gender analysis as the foundation for our development of the gender-related interventions of the projects or for the projects. So we collect data on the ground to the best of our ability and with all the resources that we can muster so that we have informed decisions in terms of preparing the gender design features. As a result of that, we were able to identify and address specific needs, like for instance, for the Karachi bus rapid transit, one of the key issues there is the need for safety of the women. So among the good gender design features of the project is the training for the staff in terms of addressing gender-based violence and occurrences of violence against women or harassment in the transportation. And also, there are help desks that address their concerns. So there are, of course, safety features in that particular project that support women's safety in terms of travel, giving them ample space, and also features that will help them contact or seek immediate assistance. The next good practice that we have that was informed by this poverty, social, and gender analysis is the development of the electrification of the urban transit for the Kyrgyz Republic. For this specific project, the women drivers were given more opportunities to improve their conditions of work, and there is an increase also in the percentage of their employment in this sector, in this subsector. So we are looking at helping them improve their lot, and of course, eventually to occupy more technical positions in the future. The third example of the project that we're looking at, and this project, aside from the support of the gender design features under the loan, is supported by transaction technical assistance, is the Uzbekistan Karek Corridor Railway electrification project. This specific, it's a Bukhara Miskin Kiva Shiva Railway electrification project. For this particular project, we identified the provision of training for women, graduates of STEM and students of STEM, so that they will be able to occupy technical positions, not only in the IA, but also in other related companies that provide support to the railway sector. So basically, these are the good practices that we have so far. Should you have more questions, you can ask me. And I'm sorry, my video is not working well, so I did not push it anymore so that I don't cause delay. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you very much, Claire. We heard you very loud and clear and really appreciate your time in sharing with us.
That's Gladys.
Yes.
Gladys.
So, sorry. Okay. So I think it was really wonderful to hear all the interventions to promote gender equality, and hopefully this gives lots of food for thought in terms of designing the gender indicators to further promote gender. So I think time is very short, and we're now actually 4:30. So if we could just maybe, if we could maybe just, if for those who can stay on a little with us, if you could please stay on. If not, we understand as well. But I'd like to invite our ITF counterpart, Wei Xuan, to maybe share some comments and some observations on what has been shared so far. Thank you. Wei Xuan, please.
Thank you, Pamela, and thank you all so much for your inputs. This has been very insightful, and it's clear that ADB is doing a lot on gender in the transport sector. And so I think we will maybe follow up on the discussion on concrete next steps. I think it seems that there could be value added to really develop a toolkit or guiding principles for both ITF and ADB member countries, and to see what are some of the overlapping challenges and opportunities where we could actually jointly develop a toolkit together. And I think this will then cover a lot of different regions in the world and drawing upon different experiences. So I'm looking forward to following up with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wei Xuan. Indeed, I think let this be a continuous dialogue and partnership in the coming months. And again, heartfelt thanks to all colleagues from ITF and ADB. But let's now invite Jamie Leather, Chief of Transport Sector Group, to share with us his closing remarks, please. Thank you, Jamie. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Pamela. Thank you, everybody, for attending. It was an excellent session. And in a way, I'm very glad it ran well over time. It just demonstrates the wealth of information that is available, the experiences that we can share. And I do hope that both ADB side and ITF side found this a very useful session. And I think, as Wei Xuan just said, there's certainly scope for future collaboration. And I hope, and we will be leading that through the transport and our gender colleagues across ADB, because I do believe this is a very important area, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make sure that we continue to improve in our work. And I just wanted to highlight 2 or 3 key items that I think came out of this discussion. The gender analysis toolkit ITF is producing, I think that will add great value, and I hope that we can provide some insights and some inputs to that, and then hopefully utilize it in our projects downstream as well. We've heard several topics and themes and ideas coming up, and how do we collate all those together? That's going to be one of the challenges, but let me just sort of oversimplify it by breaking it down into several key areas. I think labor, some staggeringly low statistics, only 7%, if I read the graph correctly, from Yeri on in Asia of women employed in transport sector. Once you add that from a development organization's perspective, that in many cities, employment at the lower income level is very high in transport. The World Bank study, I think in Dhaka, Bangladesh, had it at around 30% of households got their income from the transport sector. If you combine the very low number of women with the very high proportion of low income families and households that get income from transport, clearly there's an overlap between women employment within the sector, but also the lower income households employment within the sector. So it's actually a double hit that the low income and the women are experiencing. On the design, on the sort of physical design, looking at how we can improve the inclusive for gender, for income levels, and for age, as well as vulnerable road users. And on that, I think the technology, again, for the utilization or the passengers in on the systems, bringing up the data issues that Mario mentioned. And I would just like to say we are looking at a technical innovation challenge on safety and security for women, and focusing primarily on that last mile connectivity as well. So trying to look at large data sources, how we can harness that, utilize that to improve decision making for the passengers, but it could also be utilized in terms of the information that's available as well. One final thought on COVID, we have seen a reduction in public transport due to the reluctance of people desire to travel in crowded conditions on public transport, if indeed the public transport is allowed. This may have significant impacts on women, as we heard from many of the presentations and speeches. Women's choice of travel modes is often very limited. They don't have access to the private vehicles, and if the household does, the men normally takes the motorbike or the car, leaving the women to either walk, cycle, or in most cases, public transport. If public transport is suffering, which it has and will, and we're wondering about the financial status, how does this leave women ability to travel across urban areas post-COVID, depending on how public transport and paratransit emerges after the pandemic? I just want to finalize, and one final point on picking up on what Sam said in terms of transport has done a relatively good job in terms of meeting ADB's corporate targets. The corporate target is 75%, and I think ADB last year was 68%. One encouraging statistic is that when we start with a project at the sort of pre-feasibility or concept stage, the gender elements in those transport projects are relatively low. As those projects evolve and as they're shared across the organization, the gender components increase in how we're addressing that and go up the gender scale as we measure it within ADB. So it is information like this, sharing of experiences, and maybe the ITF toolkit that will allow our project teams to learn best practices and most importantly, incorporate those best practices in the work that we do. The Gender Action Plan was mentioned on several times, and this is a specific document within all our loan documents or our project documents that really embed how we will be addressing gender issues within supporting those within our projects. I'd like to thank ITF for giving us this opportunity to have this discussion and for sharing your insights. And I hope you found some of the ADB insights useful as well. As I said at the beginning, running over time just demonstrates how important this area is. The attitudes that we're all hoping to see a significant increase in the way we address this. And I really look forward to working with you, and I hope the rest of the ADB colleagues can join us in thanking you very much, ITF generally, and we hope we can continue this discussion and look at how we can embed and meet that corporate target of 75 and get us up from 68 to the 75% target, if not above that. But I won't promise in case we're held to that, but we certainly strive to improve each year in the transport sector's commitments to ADB's corporate gender targets. Thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Pam.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for your encouraging remarks. In the interest of time, this event will now come to a formal close. But Prajot, Arun, myself, and other interested specialists might stay on to address any other questions that ITF team may have. So IT team, you can stop recording now. Thank you. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you. So now is our informal discussion time. Prajot, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here, and I'm just trying to see if there are any interesting, comments or suggestions in the chat box.
Okay.
Yeah. There was one, question comment from Uzma Altaf on the, I think on Elizabeth's presentation.
I see. Okay. Maybe Wei Shen, that went so quickly, went past so quickly.